Let's see this in action, and I will start with the meeting controller in our project. Here I want to start with the store action, which allows us to create a new meeting and later on in this course save it to the database. Now this controller action will be reached through a post request, holding all the data encoded in the body of the request. Therefore, Laravel set this controller action up in a way that we get the request object, which allows us to access the data fields encoded in the body of the request, injected into this controller action. So we have it available to use like a normal variable throughout this controller action. Then I may retrieve the data from the request by, for example, creating a new variable and accessing the different fields like the title through the input method on this injected request object. So our service will only work correctly if we get the data in the format we need it to be to retrieve it correctly. Now I will just copy this 3 times to also retrieve the description, the time, and the user ID which is passed with this request. So all I do here for the moment is retrieve all the data from my request and store it in separate variables. Now I will just copy that and paste it into my update method, because there I will have the very same data fields, since it is pretty similar, right? I'm updating it with the same fields I was creating it. But notice one thing, in this method we're not only getting the request object injected, but we also receive the ID as an argument of this function. Now we're getting the ID here as an argument because when updating a resource, we not only get the data encoded in the body of the request, but we also have the ID of the resource of the meeting we want to update appended to the URL at the very end. And therefore, Laravel passes us both arguments, the request, which we need to extract the data encoded into it in the body of the request, and the ID, which is appended to the URL. So these mixed actions are possible. Now regarding the ID, the same is true for the show method, where we are only getting an ID. Now we're not receiving a request object here, because this method doesn't require any data being passed to it, except for the ID of the meeting we want to retrieve. Therefore, this argument is all we need here for this method to work correctly. So just to clarify that again, Laravel passes us data appended to the URL or sent via the URL as arguments to our controller actions, and therefore we may directly use these variables we're getting there throughout this controller action. So since I've got no more post requests in the meeting controller, I will continue with the registration controller. And here I want to start with the store method, which allows us to sign up a new user for a meeting, or basically register a user for a meeting. Now this method gets the request object because, well, it is reached through a post request. And regarding the data sent to this controller action, I will extract the meeting ID and the user ID of the user who should be registered for this meeting. Now finally, to finish this demo here, I will have a look at the auth controller, where we will have 2 controller actions both reached by a post request. The first one is to create a new user, so to sign up a user. Now here, according to the blueprint laid out in module 2, I will retrieve the name of the user, the email, and the password. Now I'll copy the email and password field to the sign in method, because here I basically need the same fields, but I don't need the name, since for signing in a user, I'm only interested in the email, which is the unique identification criteria provided by the user, and of course the password.